Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens when we manage to see beyond the stories our society tells? When we realize that the grand narratives organizing our lives are, in essence, human constructions? There is something profoundly unsettling in this awakening, a nearly physical sensation of vertigo, as if the ground beneath our feet suddenly turned into quicksand. Many of us experience fleeting moments of this clarity, usually late at night, when the distractions of the day fade and we are left alone with our thoughts. In these moments, we may briefly sense that the structures giving meaning to our existence are more fragile than we'd like to admit, but we quickly suppress this feeling. We return to the safety of our routines, our established beliefs, our tangible goals. And perhaps that's wise, because there is a genuine danger in seeing too far beyond the narrative. This is the paradox I want to explore today. Why truth, which we so highly value as an ideal, can become a threat when applied to the very structures that sustain our collective sanity. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in small hunter-gatherer groups where shared narratives rarely extended beyond the immediate tribe and known territory. Stories were local, orally transmitted, and adapted to the group's immediate needs. When humans began forming larger societies, roughly 12,000 years ago, with the advent of the agricultural revolution, a new and unprecedented challenge arose: how to coordinate the actions and beliefs of thousands or eventually millions of individuals who would never meet in person. The answer was the creation of grand narratives. Shared myths about gods, nations, money, laws, and institutions. These weren't mere stories for entertainment, but the very foundations that made large-scale cooperation possible. Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari calls these constructions imagined orders and identifies a crucial characteristic. For them to function effectively, people must forget that they are imagined. Money works because everyone believes it does. Laws are respected because people believe in their authority. Nations inspire sacrifice because citizens believe in their reality. The power of these narratives depends on their perception as natural, eternal, divine, or at least inevitable truths. The moment we start to see them as contingent human constructions, they begin to lose their power over us. This is not a new observation. In ancient Greece, Plato already expressed concern about how certain truths could destabilize society. In his ideal republic, he defended what he called the noble lie, a founding myth that would justify the hierarchical social structure of his utopia. Plato recognized something deeply counterintuitive: that some forms of collective illusion may be necessary for social stability. He saw this not as cynicism, but as practical necessity. A society without unifying myths would be incapable of inspiring loyalty, sacrifice, and cooperation among strangers. In the centuries that followed, the forms of these narratives changed, but their function remained similar. Organized religions provided comprehensive cosmologies, placing human existence within a larger divine plan. Nation-states created collective identities based on stories of shared pasts and common destinies. Political ideologies offered visions of ideal social organization and paths to achieve it. All these constructions, though different in content, share the same structural function: to create meaning and cohesion on a social scale. Entering modernity, particularly with the Enlightenment, we saw a fascinating new development. Skepticism toward traditional narratives, especially religious ones, became itself a dominant narrative. The pursuit of objective truth, separated from tradition and superstition, became a fundamental value. But there was an internal tension in this project. If we applied the same skeptical scrutiny to the very values of the Enlightenment, or to notions of progress, reason, and individual autonomy, what would remain? Philosopher Nietzsche saw this contradiction. His famous declaration that God is dead was not merely a rejection of religion, but an anguished recognition that the foundations of Western moral certainty were crumbling. When Nietzsche said that there are no facts, only interpretations, he wasn't advocating simplistic relativism, but acknowledging a disturbing truth. Even our most basic notions of truth and meaning are built within specific narrative structures. And if those structures disintegrate, what remains? This is the vertigo of nihilism that so haunted him. It's not that truth doesn't exist, but that raw truth, stripped of human meaning, may be unbearable or at the very least insufficient for living a fully human life. In the 20th century, these questions were explored in even more radical ways. Thinkers like Michel Foucault examined how dominant narratives are inseparable from systems of power, while Jean Baudrillard suggested that we have entered an age of simulacra, where representations of reality have become more important than reality itself. Postmodern theory, in its many forms, took this narrative skepticism to the extreme, questioning every claim to universal or objective truth. For many, this deconstructive impulse represented liberation. By recognizing the constructed nature of all narratives, we could free ourselves from oppressive systems, creating new stories that were more inclusive and just. But others saw danger in this approach. If every narrative is equally a construction, if there is no firm ground for distinguishing between more or less truthful narratives, how do we avoid falling into paralyzing relativism? How do we preserve the social cohesion necessary to face collective challenges? This tension has intensified dramatically with the advent of the digital age. The internet, especially social media, has created an unprecedented environment for the proliferation and fragmentation of narratives. The initial promise was democratic. More voices, more perspectives, a freer flow of information. But the result has often been chaos. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement favor emotionally charged content, conspiracy theories, and all kinds of tribalism. We see the emergence of what some call epistemic bubbles, where people inhabit completely different informational realities. Italian philosopher Umberto Eco once observed that the internet has given voice to legions of idiots who previously only spoke at the bar after a glass of wine without harming the community. This provocative remark captures something important about the risks of radical narrative democratization. When every voice seems equally legitimate, regardless of expertise, method, or evidence, how do we distinguish between reliable information and misinformation? How do we maintain a shared sense of reality that allows for collective deliberation and coordinated action? Now we reach the core of our paradox. On one hand, the ability to see beyond dominant narratives, to recognize their contingent and constructed nature, is crucial for social progress, for correcting historical injustices, for adapting to new challenges. On the other hand, if we take this deconstruction too far, we risk undermining the very foundations of collective meaning and social cooperation. Finding the balance between these opposing forces may be the ultimate challenge of our era. Let's consider a few concrete examples of this dilemma. Take the case of national identity. Historians have long shown that nations are imagined communities, constructed through specific historical processes, often involving simplifications, myths, and even deliberate distortions. Recognizing this can be important for confronting exclusionary or aggressive nationalisms. But if every national identity is reduced to a mere fabrication, what motivates the sacrifice required for shared civic projects? How do we maintain the solidarity necessary to sustain democratic institutions or welfare systems? Or consider money. Economically educated people know that money is ultimately a shared fiction. Paper notes and digits in bank accounts have value only because we collectively agree they do. In times of crisis, like hyperinflation or currency collapse, this fictional nature becomes painfully apparent. Yet, our entire global economy absolutely depends on this shared fiction. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in the value of money, the result would be catastrophic collapse, affecting even the most basic needs like food and shelter. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this future we're discussing most awakens your fear or apprehension? Do you lie awake at night thinking about it too? I know that we often keep these concerns to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of sounding paranoid or technophobic in a world that celebrates every new innovation without question. But your anxieties are valid and probably shared by more people than you think. Share in the comments. My greatest fear about our fragmented narrative future is your voice might help create a space where we can honestly discuss these collective fears instead of suppressing them. And perhaps by naming these fears together, we can begin to imagine ways to face them. Or let us think about social institutions, marriage, private property, formal education, legal systems. All are social constructs that could, in theory, be organized in radically different ways. Anthropologists and historians have documented the immense diversity of human arrangements across time and space. This insight can be liberating, opening possibilities for reform and social reimagination, but it can also be paralyzing. If everything is constructed and contingent, how do we decide which structures to preserve, reform, or abandon? How do we avoid social chaos during periods of radical transition? Religion perhaps offers the clearest example of this paradox. For the devout believer, religion provides a comprehensive system of meaning, clear moral values, existential comfort, and often a supportive community. The secular perspective, which views religions as human, historical constructions, can challenge these benefits. But even atheist thinkers, such as Alain de Botton, recognize that religions evolve to meet deep human needs that do not simply vanish when theological belief is abandoned. How do we create meaning, community, and comfort in a post-religious world? This question remains unsatisfactorily answered for many. Science fiction offers fascinating explorations of this dilemma. In the film The Matrix, humans are presented with a choice: the blue pill of comfortable ignorance or the red pill of painful truth. The film clearly privileges the red pill, the pursuit of truth at any cost. But what if the issue is more complicated? What if certain illusions are necessary for psychological health or social cooperation? What happens if everyone takes the red pill at once? This brings us to one of the oldest and most persistent philosophical questions. What is the value of truth? Why do we seek knowledge? In the Western tradition, we often assume that truth is an intrinsic good, that more knowledge is always better than less. But this assumption deserves closer examination. As Nietzsche asked, why truth? Why not untruth, or uncertainty, or even ignorance? This is not a defense of lies or manipulation, but a recognition that the relationship between truth and human well-being may be more complicated than our post-Enlightenment culture generally admits. Certain forms of knowledge can come with significant psychological and social costs. The ability to see beyond narratives can be both liberating and alienating. The psychologist Ernest Becker, in his book The Denial of Death, argued that much of human culture functions as an immortality project, an elaborate denial of our inevitable mortality. Religions promise life after death. Secular cultures offer symbolic immortality through achievements, fame, descendants, or identification with projects larger than individual life. By exposing these mechanisms as psychological coping strategies, are we truly helping people? Or are we undermining systems that evolved precisely to protect us from truths that might be psychologically unbearable? Perhaps most disturbing is recognizing that none of us is immune to this dilemma. Even those who pride themselves on skepticism, rationality, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths depend on narratives to make sense of existence. The idea that we can stand completely outside of narratives, view them objectively from some privileged point beyond culture, is itself an illusion. We are always within some story, even if it is the story of escaping stories. The question then is not whether we should embrace or reject narratives, but which narratives we choose, with what degree of awareness and for what purposes. How do we navigate between the twin poles of blind dogmatism and paralyzing nihilism? How do we maintain narratives robust enough to sustain meaning and cooperation, yet open to revision, growth, and adaptation? Consider how different societies have faced this challenge. Japan, for example, has maintained a fascinating balance between rapid modernization and the preservation of cultural traditions. To what extent does this reflect a more sophisticated approach to collective narratives? Or think of how post-colonial nations struggle to build national identities that acknowledge traumatic histories while still inspiring hope and unity. What lessons can we learn from these ongoing social experiments? Scandinavia offers another interesting example. These are highly secular societies that still maintain exceptional levels of social trust, cooperation, and well-being. What narratives have replaced traditional religion in these contexts? How do they sustain meaning and solidarity without resorting to transcendent founding myths? Returning to digital technology, we see how it intensifies this dilemma. On one hand, the internet has democratized access to information, allowing previously suppressed truths to surface and challenge official narratives. On the other, it has created an environment where false narratives spread as quickly as true ones, where algorithms optimized for engagement favor divisive, polarizing content. Political philosopher Michael Sandel argues that we have lost the art of civil discourse precisely because we avoid substantive engagement with questions of value and meaning. By trying to build politics purely on individual rights and economic efficiency, he says, we create a vacuum easily filled by populism, tribalism, and fundamentalism. Perhaps the solution is not less engagement with meaning-laden narratives, but more, though, in a more reflective and open form. Evolutionary biology offers a helpful perspective here. As a species, we evolved as storytellers. Our capacity to create and believe in shared fictions is not a design flaw, but a crucial adaptation that enabled large-scale cooperation. Anthropologist and evolutionary theorist Joseph Henrich argues that this ability for cumulative cultural transmission, including shared narratives, is what sets us apart from other intelligent species. This suggests that abandoning shared narratives entirely is not only undesirable, but possibly impossible for creatures like us. If we accept this, the question becomes, how do we make the best use of this evolutionary trait? How do we create and maintain narratives that are simultaneously inspiring and flexible, unifying and inclusive, meaningful and adaptable? A promising approach comes from German philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer and his concept of the fusion of horizons. Gadamer argued that genuine understanding does not come from completely escaping our own cultural perspective, which is impossible, but from engaging respectfully with other perspectives in ways that expand our own interpretive horizon. This suggests a relationship to narratives that is neither uncritical acceptance nor total rejection, but continuous dialogical engagement. Another useful model comes from psychologist and philosopher William James and his pragmatism. James suggested judging ideas not merely by their abstract truth, but by their practical consequences for human life. Some narratives, even if not literally true in an absolute sense, can be true enough if they lead to richer, more meaningful, more connected lives. This pragmatic approach avoids both dogmatism and nihilism. Writer Rebecca Solnit offers another valuable perspective. In her book, Hope in the Dark, she argues for a form of hope that depends neither on certainty nor on naive optimism. Hope, Solnit suggests, is the embrace of the uncertainty of human history, recognizing both its tragedies and its surprising openings. This form of hope may be a model for how to inhabit narratives provisionally, committedly, but not dogmatically. This brings us back to our initial paradox. The danger of seeing beyond the narrative is not that truth is inherently harmful, but that certain kinds of truth, approached in certain ways, can undermine the very structures that sustain meaning and human cooperation. The solution is neither blind acceptance of traditional narratives nor their radical rejection, but a more mature, reflective relationship with our shared stories. What does this mean in practice? For individuals, it suggests an attitude of humble curiosity. We can critically examine the narratives we inherit, question their assumptions, recognize their limitations, yet still appreciate their value and function. We can hold our dearest beliefs with what philosopher Richard Rorty called irony, an acknowledgement of their contingency and limitation, that does not diminish their power in our lives. For communities and societies, it suggests the need for spaces where different narratives can be explored, debated, and revised in a spirit of mutual respect. It means creating what sociologist Jürgen Habermas called the ideal speech situation, conditions in which different voices can truly be heard, where arguments are evaluated on their merits rather than on the power of those who advance them. For educators, it suggests the importance of teaching not only content, but metacognition, the ability to think about our own thinking. To recognize our own narrative assumptions, we need to form people who can inhabit narratives consciously, who can be both committed and critical, grounded and reflective. For leaders and communicators, it suggests the responsibility to craft narratives that are inspiring without being manipulative, that unite without homogenizing, that offer meaning without demanding blind dogmatism. We need fewer narratives that simplify complexity into heroes and villains, and more that honor the true complexity of human experience. Perhaps the greatest challenge is to develop what philosopher Paul Ricoeur called second naivete, a relationship with myths and symbols that comes after critique, not before it. It is the ability to find meaning in narratives even while recognizing their constructed nature. It is like the adult who can appreciate a fairy tale on a different level than a child, seeing in it truths that transcend the question of literalness. To conclude, I would like to return to the image of vertigo with which I began. When we see beyond the narratives that structure our reality, we may momentarily feel as if the ground has vanished beneath our feet. But perhaps the problem is not the absence of solid ground, but our expectation that it should exist. Perhaps the human condition is precisely this: to create meaning in a universe that offers none inherently, to tell stories knowing they are our creations, not discoveries. Philosopher Albert Camus captured this beautifully in his essay The Myth of Sisyphus. Confronted with the apparent absurdity of the human condition, Camus advocated neither despair nor retreat into illusory comforts. Instead, he imagined Sisyphus condemned to eternally push a boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down as happy in his task. The struggle itself toward the heights, Camus wrote, is enough to fill a man's heart. Perhaps there is a similar lesson for us. The struggle to create and sustain meaningful narratives, even while aware of their fragility and contingency, is not a tragic flaw or a necessary compromise, but the very heart of the human condition. It is what makes us human. Seeing beyond the narrative need not lead to despair or nihilism if we accept that the meaning we create, though not eternal or absolute, is still real in its consequences and worthy of our care and commitment. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling but perhaps have not found the words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will join a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we gather here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so that we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with greater wisdom and purpose in a world that so often leaves us disoriented and divided.
A lot of people, if they're watching this video, it was recommended to them by an algorithm.
Algorithms now are extremely powerful. They increasingly control us. I'm now publishing a book. I'm on a book tour. My number one client is not a human being, it's the algorithm. If I can get the algorithm to recommend my book, that's it. My job is done. The humans will follow the algorithm. We need these algorithms, otherwise we can't manage these huge information network without algorithmic help. They should be accountable. If a social media algorithm recommends to people a hate-filled conspiracy theory, this is the fault not of the person who produced the conspiracy theory. It's the fault of the people who designed and let loose the algorithm. There is this huge debate about freedom of speech. I think we should be extremely careful about censoring the free speech of human beings. But they should be held accountable for the decisions of their algorithms. And algorithms don't have freedom of speech. It's the first time in history that there is something which is not a human being that decides which stories to spread and that can create new stories.
When I write a book, I would sometimes try to imagine my reader. And I usually base my imagined reader either on myself or on people I actually know or on encounters I had with students at university or public events or interviews. But this is a very limited pool of examples of data. When I'm doing it, maybe I have a kind of pool of information on a couple of hundred people. The AI that would write the book or the piece of music, it would have data on millions and billions of human beings over time. If the goal is to create a certain state of mind for other people, I just don't see how we can compete with the AI on that, especially as it will also have the advantage of being able to tailor the book, the song, specifically to different people.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Alex Gardels. I am the director of Studio B. Tonight we have a wonderful program for you. And I'm going to hand it off to my lovely colleague, Natalia Ramos, to give a slight introduction.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So at the Berggruen Institute, we like to say that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. But we also believe that in order to have real impact, that idea needs a story. And so that's why we started Studio B, to bring together the thinkers, the scientists, the philosophers, the technologists, with the greatest storytellers of our time. Because at this moment of planetary scale transformation, getting the story right is more important than ever. So thank you all for being here, and I'm now going to pass it over to our founder, Nicholas.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Nicholas Berggruen, Berggruen Institute. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Studio B. Thank you, everyone at the Berggruen Institute. And most importantly, thank you, Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Yuval Harari. Frankly, they don't need an introduction. I think you know who Joseph is. He is, in some ways, one of yours, meaning he is LA, Hollywood. He is he's behind and in front of the camera, and he's been engaged intellectually on the issues that we care about at the Institute. One of those issues is who are we becoming? Who do we want to be, humans, in an age where we can, in theory, change our own nature, transform ourselves through gene editing, AI, quantum computing. And no one has maybe put this into perspective like Yuval Harari. And Yuval wrote a new book, Nexus, which is powerful and, frankly, incredibly timely, because his vision, I think, has been that we've created our lives, our civilizations, from narratives. And we humans have really driven those narratives. But now with AI, it could be that the narrative is driven beyond us, even though in theory it came from us. So we could lose control if we ever had it, but we could really lose the narrative that we are potentially unleashing. So let's hear about it tonight, and thank you again.
Hey everybody, what's going on? Did that feel like a movie moment or what? Is that? Jesus. All right. I'm really, really excited to be here. Thank you to Nicholas and everyone at the Berggruen Institute, Studio B. I am an enormous fan of this man's writing here, Mr. Yuval Harari. Ladies and gentlemen, can we hear it for him? He's written a new book called Nexus. I want to talk to you about that tonight, of course. Now, you're on a book tour. I'm sure you're talking about this book a lot and maybe saying some of the same things over and over again. I've never experienced that before myself, having to say the same things over and over again, promoting a piece of media. Watch Killer Heat, released on Amazon today. Prime Video. So I'm going to try to come at this conversation and let you say some of the things you want to say to everybody, but also maybe come at it from a perspective that's unique to this time and place. We're here in Los Angeles, which is sort of the epicenter of the film and television industry. I've worked in film and television my entire life. And a lot of your book is about storytelling. I love to consider myself a storyteller. As an actor and a filmmaker, it's something that I think of as more than a job. I connect to it on maybe an existential level, on who I am. And one thing I often like to say even is that storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you, you wrote a book about humans called Sapiens. How many people have read Sapiens here? Yeah. So as an expert on the history and the prehistory of what humans are, I'm curious to hear what you think of that statement. If I say storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yes!
This is the this is the source of our power. We control the world because we can cooperate in much larger numbers than any other animal. And the secret of cooperation of humans is stories. I mean, you can't get to know more than 100 or 200 individuals, but the same story can be known to millions and even billions of people. And as long as everybody believes the same story, they can cooperate. They can agree on norms and values and so forth. And maybe to just throw just give one or two examples. If you think about the most famous face in history, the most famous portrait in history. So this is the face of Jesus. That over 2,000 years, more portraits of Jesus have been created than probably of any other person in history. And they are everywhere. In churches, in cathedrals, in houses, in schools, in government ministries, at least in some countries. And 100% of these portraits are fictional. Not a single one is authentic, because nobody has any idea how Jesus actually looked like. There is not a single portrait or statue made during his lifetime that has survived. The earliest portrait we have is from about 200 years after his death, and it shows a man crucified on a cross with the head of a donkey, because it was a graffiti drawn by anti-Christians who made fun of this new strange cult. In the Bible itself, there is not a single word about how the man looked like. There is one description of his clothes, but nothing about him, whether he was tall or short or thin or fat or black hair or bald or blonde, nothing. Everything is just fictions. And yet, these fictions have enabled billions of people to work together, whether for good purposes, like charities and building hospitals and whatever, or whether for fighting holy wars and launching inquisitions. But it all runs on stories. And religion is an easy example, but perhaps the most important or successful example is money.
You're saying that money is a story.
It's just, like, what else can it be? I mean, it has no objective value. You can't eat or drink dollars. The most successful storytellers in the world are not the people who win the Nobel Prize in literature. It's the people who win the Nobel Prize in economics. And one last thought, if you think about the United States today, maybe the last story that still holds this place together is the dollar. It's the only thing that Republicans and Democrats can still agree on is the value of a dollar. Everything else is like they have very different views.
So this gets at one of the things I found fascinating in the book, that you define stories not only by the content of that story, but the network of people that are connected by that story. You mentioned Republicans and Democrats, you mentioned Christians. Every story, especially any story of any popularity, it defines a certain network. Can you say more? Because that was a new concept to me.
Again, I mean, the way that Nexus tries to understand history is not the history of religions, cultures, wars, kings, but how information flows in the world and the networks of information that create the world. So to give one example, we tend to think about democracy and dictatorship as two contrasting types of ethical systems, of political systems. They have different ideals, different values, and which is true, but you can, on a more fundamental level, you can look at them as different information networks. Information simply flows differently in a dictatorship and in a democracy. A dictatorship is a network in which all the information flows to one hub, where all the decisions are being made. Whereas democracy is a system in which information, if dictatorship is a centralized information system, democracy is a distributed or decentralized system. Well, yes, some information flows to the center, let's say to Washington, where some decisions are being made, but most decisions are made elsewhere. Like if you look at the United States over the last century, so a lot of extremely important decisions were made here in Hollywood. And the influence of the people in Washington on what's happening in Hollywood, it's an open debate. Who influenced more whom? Was it Washington influencing Hollywood or vice versa? In the Soviet Union, there is no debate. I mean, the people in the center Stalin is telling Eisenstein what to film. There is no debate. You do the wrong thing, you go to the gulag. Even if you do the right thing, you might go to the gulag. So that's the difference in how information flows between democracies and dictatorships, and I guess we'll get to that, but one of the biggest questions about AI is what will it do to these contrasting types of information flows, because in the 20th century, the US defeated the USSR ultimately because centralized information processing was inefficient. When all information about everything, economics, culture, the film industry, producing cars, all the information flowed to Moscow, and there are some bureaucrats needed to make decisions, they couldn't do it. They were overwhelmed by the amount of information and either made no decisions or bad decisions. Whereas the distributed system of the United States, it functioned much more efficiently. But what happens if you replace humans with AIs? Humans are overwhelmed by too much information. AIs become more efficient when you flood them with information. Again, it's an open debate. We still don't know the answer, but there is at least one school of thought that argues that AI will make centralized information systems more efficient, and the main problem of totalitarian and centralized system in the 20th century will become their big advantage, which we even see to some extent in the economic realm, that these huge high-tech monopolies that just monopolize entire sections of the economy, because size matters when you have this kind of technology.
Yeah. I want to get to AI. This is something I'm deeply fascinated with. I know a lot of you are too. I also want to get to what you just said about whether Hollywood or Washington is making more decisions, because we love to think that we're important here in Hollywood.
You are.
Before we do, I just want to cover one of the pieces of vocabulary that I found the most useful in your book that I want to go back to a few times as we talk tonight. And again, I think this is sort of empowering and flattering if you're a storyteller. You say in the book that stories can even create a new level of reality. And you talk about 3 different versions of reality, if you will. Objective reality, subjective reality, and intersubjective reality. Can you explain what you mean by those terms?
Yeah, so objective reality is things that exist whether you believe in them or not, whether you know about them or not. If an asteroid from outer space is now coming towards us, about to hit Earth and destroy human civilization, it exists whether people know about it or not. And similarly, viruses killed people, billions of people, long before anybody knew viruses exist. It doesn't matter if you believe in them or not, they can kill you. This is objective reality. Then you have subjective reality, which is reality in the mind of a single person. It depends on the consciousness, on the awareness of a single person. So if you feel pain, nobody else in the world feels this pain. Your doctor, your family can tell you, oh, there is nothing wrong with you. But if you feel the pain, it's still there. This is subjective reality. Now, intersubjective reality, this is something that didn't exist for, as far as we know, for most of the history of the universe. There were only objective and subjective realities. That's it. And stories were important for the appearance in the last few tens of thousands of years, at least in our species, of a new type of reality, intersubjective reality. Things that exist in the interaction between many consciousnesses, between many minds, that they often exist on the level of story, and we already mentioned some of them. Money is maybe the most important type of intersubjective reality. It's not objective. A dollar has no objective value in the sense that you can eat it or drink it or make something out of it. If you're a billionaire and you fly in your private jet with, I don't know, $1 billion, and you crash on a deserted island inhabited only by, I don't know, monkeys and rats and whatever, your dollars are worthless. You cannot buy anything from the monkeys. You cannot make them build a raft for you. You still have maybe the papers, or you can show them on your smartphone to the monkeys. Look, I have $1 billion in my bank account. Just build this raft or give me these bananas. I'll give you as much as you want. It won't help. They are simply unaware of the existence of this reality. Now, if you crash on a lonely island with a cargo of bananas, you can eat them. If you crash with a cargo of, I don't know, Hummers, you can use them to try and build a raft. But the most worthless thing to crash on a lonely island with is money.
There's nothing to do with it. But if you have other people there and they believe the same story as you, it works. But again, it's fragile. Intersubjective realities are fragile because people can lose faith in it. Again, it happens to gods, that some gods were once the most powerful intersubjective realities in the world, and now nobody believes in them, and they are gone. And the same thing happens to money. And it's, going back, say, to the dollar, it's now interesting to see what might happen if some people lose faith in this intersubjective reality and instead put their faith in another one like the Bitcoin. So the same way that we had wars of religion in previous eras, now we might have, just imagine trying to run a society when different people just reject the money of the other group. No, ours is better.
So one of the most powerful tools to create an intersubjective reality in our time is film and television. And again, here we are in LA, lots of us work making film and television. I'm curious just to dive in a little bit. You don't talk about Hollywood, film, and TV too much in your book, but because we're here, I'm curious to just ask you about it. We're also, by the way, here at the house where the horse head scene was shot from The Godfather, which, come on, yeah, The Godfather. I'm curious to hear from you, from a historical perspective, how did film and TV change storytelling compared to the technologies that existed before film and TV, do you think?
So film and TV are, of course, not alone. They are part of the package of modern information technology. And the changes were enormous. Again, going back to one salient example, if you think about the history of democracy, so for most of history, large-scale democracies were simply impossible. There was no way to create a large-scale democracy because democracy is a conversation. And in a Stone Age tribe, you want to have a conversation between all tribe members. It's relatively easy. They can all come together and talk. But as human societies became bigger and bigger, it became more and more difficult to bring everybody together to the town square or to the same place to have a conversation. So we don't know of any large-scale democracy in ancient times. All the examples, like Athens or Rome, or city-states, or even smaller tribes and towns. We begin to see large-scale democracies only in the late modern era, with the rise of modern information technologies. First the newspaper, and then telegraph and radio and television and film and finally the internet. This is when you begin to see large-scale democracies because you can use these technologies to create a conversation in real time between millions of people. People spread over entire continents and they all watch the same news on television, the same TV series, the same movie at the same time, so they can connect in a way that was just impossible before. And this was the foundation of modern large-scale democracy. And again, we'll get to that later, but the new information technologies of the present era, like social media and AI, they are destabilizing democracy for this reason, because democracy is built on top of information technology, so it's not hard to see why a major change in information technology will create an earthquake in the structure built on top of it, which is democracy. But the last thing I'll say is that every technology has many different usages. Also, modern totalitarian regimes are built on the same technology. There were no totalitarian regimes in the ancient world, large-scale totalitarian regimes. Totalitarian regimes are regimes that try to control everybody all the time, everything you do. In the ancient world, you have many monarchies and autocracies, but most of the time, the emperor in Rome, he collects taxes and he directs the armies, but he doesn't try to manage the life of every individual in every village on a day-to-day basis, because this is simply impossible. You begin to see it at the same large-scale totalitarianism at the same time as large-scale democracy, because it relies on the same technology. I mean, the Soviets, for instance, I mean, at the same time that Hollywood is established,
Right.
You also see the flowering of the Soviet film industry, and the Soviets were masters, at least in the beginning, of the art of filmmaking.
Eisenstein.
Yeah. And they use the same technology to create a totalitarian regime that everybody from, you know, the Pacific Ocean to the Baltic Sea would watch the same movies, and all the movies are giving the same narrative, the same messages directed from the center.
The Nazis were also brilliant filmmakers.
Exactly.
Leni Riefenstahl, and yeah. You were touching on it, but that's the next place I wanted to go is, okay, so if film and television changed the intersubjective realities and changed the way that networks can form, let's move to the dominant media technology for the last couple decades, because sadly enough, that's not film and TV. Not that film and TV did such a great job, but the dominant technology now has been social media. So I'm curious to ask you the same question that I asked about film and TV. With the rise of social media, how did that change what networks could form, what intersubjective realities could be created, and how humans behaved and thought?
Well, it had immense impact. I mean, just think about the numbers. You have billions of people spending hours every day on this. It is bound to have a tremendous impact. And it creates new ways to form networks, to organize people, which again has a profound impact on society. And it had positive influence and also negative influence. I'll talk a little about the positive influence. I tend to talk a lot about the negativities, but maybe start with the positive influence of social media. The example I like best is from my own personal life. I met my husband, Itzik, 22 years ago in one of the first social media websites for gay people in Israel. And the thing about, for instance, social media in the gay community is that over history you have two types of minorities. You have, again, in terms of information networks, you have concentrated minorities and you have dispersed minorities. So Jews, for instance, are a concentrated minority. Even if they say in a particular country of just 1% of the population, they are concentrated in particular communities, neighborhoods. So usually a Jewish boy would be born into a Jewish family in a Jewish neighborhood. So finding other Jews isn't a problem. You're surrounded by them, even though you're just 1% of the population.
As a native Angelino, I can confirm that this is true.
But a gay boy is usually not born into a gay family in a gay neighborhood. And being born gay in Israel in the 1970s and growing up in the 1980s and 1990s in what was a very homophobic society, like the first issue is, how do you find anybody else? I mean, I didn't know anybody who was out, certainly not in my town. I saw, again, this goes back to film and television, like the first time I saw gay people was on the screen.
What show was it, or movie, do you remember?
There was this British series, Are You Being Served? With, what's his name?
I don't know it. Wow.
Really?
Okay, yeah, no.
Mr. Humphreys. So, there was one film that I saw later in the 90s, Lilies, by a Canadian director, I think.
What's it called?
Lilies.
Lilies.
It wasn't very famous, but he had a tremendous impact on my life.
Great, yeah.
Like, I remember going to see this movie and coming out of the movie theater and telling myself, you're gay.
Wow.
This was really, it had a huge impact on my life. But you know, you see a gay person on television, you can't reach out to them. And you don't know who else in my town now sees the same movie or the same series and feels the same as me. It's only one directional. But then social media, the internet came, and social media came, and you can interact suddenly through the screen. So what was kind of maybe the biggest hurdle ever? How do you find the others? Suddenly becomes very, very easy.
All right, that's the positive side.
That's the positive side.
But
there are also negativities. I mean, as you may have noticed, we now have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and we can't talk to each other anymore. And certainly we can't listen to each other. I said earlier that democracy is a conversation, and the conversation is breaking down all over the world. I mean, every country has its own special explanations why Republicans and Democrats can't hold a reasoned conversation anymore. And you have all these explanations about American history and society and whatever. But then you go to Brazil, it's the same thing. You go to Israel, it's the same thing. I even was in Canada 2 weeks ago. I thought this was the same place. They tell me, no, it's the same in Canada. And what's happening? And it's not like the ideological divides today are much worse than they were, let's say, in the 60s. The ideological divides in the 60s were actually much, much bigger. The issues like the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, even the violence, at least up till now, was much worse in terms of assassinations and riots and so forth. But nevertheless, people could still hold a conversation, agree on some basic facts like who won the last elections, and have bipartisan laws. So why is it breaking down all over the world? And the best answer so far that we know about is social media. Again, this basic information technology underlying the whole structure, it's now creating an earthquake. And the mechanism by now is quite well understood. I mean, 10 years ago, it was not well understood, unfortunately. Now we know what's wrong. We still fail to fix it, but at least we know what's wrong. And this is very important because this is kind of the first major impact of AI on history. Because social media is managed not by human beings, it's managed by algorithms, AIs. And again, this is very interesting because one of the first jobs which was automated was not taxi drivers, and it was not textile workers, it was media editors, news editors. You know, in the 19th and 20th century, being an editor of a major media or news organization was an immensely powerful position. You shaped the conversation. You decided what people would be talking about. Some of the most powerful figures in modern history, they began as editors. Lenin's only job before he became Soviet dictator was editor of the newspaper Iskra.
I did not know that. That's funny.
Benito Mussolini was a journalist. Then he was editor of Avanti, I think was the name of the newspaper. And then he was promoted from editor of Avanti to dictator of Italy.
Mussolini and Lenin both?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
You know, if you look at the French Revolution, Jean-Paul Marat shaped the French Revolution by editing the major newspaper of Paris in those days, L'Ami des Peuples, the friend of the people. And now this job has been given to algorithms. Who is the editor of the Facebook newsfeed? Who is the editor of TikTok? Who is the editor of Twitter? An algorithm, a non-human intelligence. And these AIs, these algorithms, they were given by their human masters a seemingly benign goal: increase user engagement. Engagement, sounds good to be engaged, no? And the reason was obvious. I mean, business model. The more time people are engaged on TikTok or Facebook or Twitter, the more time they spend on the platform, the more they share and so forth, the more advertisements you can show them, and the more data you can collect about them and sell it to a third party or use it to produce even more powerful algorithms and AIs. So the business model of most social media try to keep people glued to the screen as much as possible. And this was the task given to the editors of these places. Increase user engagement. And the algorithms experimented on millions, actually billions of human guinea pigs, and they made a discovery, which was actually also made by philosophers and politicians thousands of years ago, but now the AIs discovered it also, that the easiest way to increase user engagement is outrage, or greed, or fear, or hate. If you press the greed button, or the hate button, or the fear button in a human's mind, you grab their attention. You get them glued to the screen. And this is what they did. They flooded the information market with more and more outrage and greed and fear, with fake news and conspiracy theories, and the conversation broke down. And this was very, very primitive AIs. This was like, long before ChatGPT, which is also quite primitive compared to what's coming. But even this, when people talk about, this kind of future fears about AIs, it's not in the future, it's already in the past. If you look at the impact of these very primitive AIs on democracies all over the world, on societies all over the world, it's not too early to worry about the impact of AI. It's too late in many ways.
One thing I would just compliment what you're saying with is that it is true that the algorithms, as you put it, sort of discovered that the best way to maximize engagement was outrage, fear, extremism, etc. What's harder to describe with language is the algorithm doesn't know that exactly. I don't think.
No, they are not conscious, not at all.
The algorithm is not like a person saying, there's greed, there's hate, I know, I'll put more hate and greed in the feed. It's not like that. It's just a cold and dumb pattern matching calculation.
It's cold and smart. No.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's a fair segue. Cold and dumb to cold and smart. We've talked about film and TV. Now we've talked about social media. Now I want to talk about what's coming next. We all, I think, are kind of aware we're at the very beginning of some very big changes that are coming fast and furious our way because of the rapidly emerging technology known as AI. I want to, through the same, your book, you say so many different things about AI, and I want to just narrow it down to, again, because we're kind of coming at this conversation through the lens of storytelling, to start there. How do you think AI will change storytelling from what it used to be?
Well, as we said earlier, stories are some of the most powerful technologies in history. Whether it's the story of Jesus or whether it's the story of money, this is really the foundation of human civilization, is stories. Everything else is built on top of it. And for tens of thousands of years, the only entities on this planet that could create stories, either create new stories or elaborate and interpret old stories, were human beings. Only the human mind was capable of doing it. And now we have on this planet another entity which is capable of spreading and interpreting and ultimately creating stories. It's not conscious, at least not yet, at least as far as we know. At least my position is you don't need consciousness to do these things. You need intelligence. Intelligence and consciousness are different things. Intelligence is the ability to attain goals, to solve problems. Consciousness is the ability to feel things, pain and pleasure, love and hate. We tend to confuse them because in humans and also in other mammals and animals, consciousness and intelligence go together. We solve problems through our feelings. But AI and computers, they are very different. As far as we know, they have no consciousness, they don't feel anything, but they are highly intelligent, at least in some fields. And again, if you think about storytelling,
So now the ability of AIs to compose stories, to write texts and create images and create music is really astounding. You know, people say, yes, it's still not as good as the best humans, but it's already better than many humans, or people would say than the average human even. And it's only the beginning, it's nothing, it's just 10 years since the AI revolution began. We haven't seen anything yet. And when I read, for instance, a story composed by AI, what strikes me the most, you can say, oh, it's not good because of this or that, it lacks this, but it's really a story. It's held together by some coherent ideas, motifs. It's not just some kind of glorified autocomplete that it just strings words together randomly, or it takes bits and pieces of sentences from here and there and put them together. No, there is actually a logic to the story. So even if it's not as good as the best human storytellers in 2024, where will it be in 2034 or 44? And again, stories are not just mythological stories, or poems, or theater plays, or movies. Money is also a story. So these things are going to create new financial devices also. Finance is one of the most creative things of all. If you think about human creativity, so think money, checks, ETFs, CDOs, all these things extremely creative. And they are increasingly we are going to see new financial devices created by a non-human intelligence. And for tens of thousands of years, we lived cocooned inside a human culture. Like our lives are shaped by all these stories and artifacts that other humans created. Again, from the holy books, the Bible and the Quran and the Vedas, to the songs and the music and the theater and the movies and the artifacts, the chair, the shoes, everything. This cultural cocoon made by humans. What does it mean? Before we get to the question, is it good, is it bad, is it dangerous? Just leave aside for a moment the judgment. Just think about what would it mean for human beings to live inside a world woven, to a large extent, by an alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense that it's coming from outer space. Alien in the sense that it creates in a very different way than the human mind. And this, I think, is the biggest question that we are facing, certainly in Hollywood, kind of the center, the epicenter of human storytelling, but all over the world.
So here is probably the only thing in the book that I don't think I agree with exactly.
That's
and so,
good.
Yeah, so I would love to hash this out with you a bit.
Yeah.
Describing AI as alien intelligence. Clearly, you're not talking about an alien from outer space. I understand. But you also, in the book, even do use the word God. You say perhaps these are entities that could be seen as some kind of new gods. Mm-hmm. So I tend to feel like describing this technology in terms like alien, God, the personification or the deification of these computer systems, I'm worried that story could do more harm than good. And I have some reasons why, but before I get to them, I would just want to start by asking, so you very decisively decided in your book to describe this technology in these terms, alien, God. Tell me about your thought process. Why did you decide to describe the technology in those terms?
I mean, it's basically a PR strategy. How do you present it to the public? And yes, I mean, it demands a lot of thought. Is it a good PR strategy or not, in terms of the results?
And one reason I chose to go in the alien direction is because I see too much of the discussion gets bogged down in the idea that AI is trying to reach human-level intelligence. And that the very definition, what is AI? It's the moment when computers are somehow equivalent to humans. And I think this is completely misleading.
I very much agree with that.
AI is not progressing towards human-level intelligence, just as airplanes are not trying to reach bird-level flight.
Yeah.
They are just doing their own thing, which is completely different from birds. And that's also what I think about computers and AIs. They are doing their own intelligent thing, which is completely different from the human intelligence. And this is one reason that I chose the kind of term alien to describe it.
I think that's a great reason. I also find it counterproductive when AI is described in these kinds of terms. Is it approaching human-level intelligence? They throw around this term AGI, artificial general intelligence, and they define it quickly as once it approaches human-level intelligence. I agree. I don't think that's helpful either. I'll tell you one of the reasons why I am concerned with describing this technology and sort of personifying it or deifying it, and that is a little bit about how the tech actually works and is built. I'm obviously not an engineer, but I've learned enough about this. The way that these models are built is they take enormous sets of data. They input that data into an algorithm, a sort of a black box that they frankly don't even totally understand, and it spits out outputs of value. Now, where did all that data come from that was input into the model? It came from humans. Humans generated that data. So my concern about describing it as alien or godlike is it feels distinct from, separate from humans. It feels like it helps to hide the reality of how these models really work. Because, by the way, I think a lot of these tech companies, maybe not all of them, CEO of Stability is in the house and they're working on, what are they called? Sanitized data sets, which I really appreciate, actually getting the licenses of the data sets that they're using to train these models. But I think a lot of these labs, they're not doing that. What they're doing is stealing a bunch of data from people who deserve the right to, I think, own the data that they created. And they're not disclosing what data went into these models. When they are asked, they won't say. They're getting sued left and right because of this. To me, this is a really central problem that we absolutely need to solve as soon as possible for a lot of reasons that I want to get into. One of those problems is economic. We in the film and television industry are going to feel it maybe first. But I don't think it's limited to Hollywood. I think so many industries, whether it's doctors or architects, designers, logistics operators, anybody who's working at a computer, and once there's robots, really anybody that's doing almost any work is going to have their livelihood threatened. And these tech companies are going to try to say, oh, well, we invented a god. It can just do your job. When in reality, what they did was they stole everybody's data, crunched up the numbers, and generated those outputs. Without the human-generated data, their products are 100% useless, have no value at all. And so one of my concerns with describing this technology in terms of gods or aliens or anything that sort of personifies it or turns it into a creature, a thing on its own that exists independently of the human input that made it, is that it helps these tech companies hide where their products really come from. And where they really came from is humans. Okay.
So I agree. I mean, I think that the main issue is whether we focus on the input or on the output. I completely agree with what you describe. I think about it that, AI is basically eating the whole of human culture.
that we've produced over tens of thousands of years, from the cave paintings of tens of thousands of years ago to the movies of today, we've produced this enormous amount of cultural artifacts and habits. And now AI comes and eats it within just a few months or years. And I think you're also absolutely correct that the business model of many of these companies is based on kind of this trick that convincing everybody that information works differently from everything else in the universe. And I think this goes back to Shoshana Zuboff's very insightful book, Surveillance Capitalism.
Yeah.
Where she explains that, for thousands of years, people had this basic principle, don't steal. And then the tech companies come and says, yes, don't steal, but it doesn't apply to information. That's different. That's a different realm that all these things about, no, it's not stealing. And again, the reaction should be, why is so different with information? And here I completely agree that, I'll think about it more, that using this kind of terminology of making it very alien is actually helping this way of presenting things. When I think about the kind of alien nature of the technology, I think mainly about the output. Because it ate all these kind of familiar things, but it then starts to create things which are different, at least in some ways, from everything that was put into it. And this idea that AI is just, glorified copy-paste, that it takes texts or images or music and just takes something from here and something from there and puts it together and, it's something new. And no, it's really more than that. I mean, to some extent, this is also what humans do. And I think about my line of work of writing books. So I do the same thing. I read all these previous books and articles and I talk with people and then I take something from here and something from there and put it together and here is a new book. And it's the same with music. I mean, nobody starts from nothing. Every musician listens to previous works of art and adds something, but without the previous input, nobody could do it.
It's true. That is true. Finish your thought, but I want to respond to that.
So, and I think that it's crucial to understand what we are facing in the AI revolution, that my fear of humanizing it too much is that then the kind of underestimate the challenge. That we think, it can only cut and paste together our creations. It won't really be something completely new. No, it can create really, again, from finance to religions, it can create completely new things, which could be good, could be bad, but we will have to deal with living in a really radically different reality.
I do agree with that, and we shouldn't underestimate the challenge. One thing I wanted to respond to is, first of all, I agree with you that creativity is always an amalgamation of your influences. Shakespeare wasn't the first one to write Romeo and Juliet, and the Judy Garland Wizard of Oz is actually not the first Wizard of Oz, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a big fan. The creative community that I founded, Hit Record, was all about remix and people building on each other's work, and let's privilege honesty over originality because we're all original human beings. But that's just it, I think. We're all original human beings. I think to apply that same way of thinking to a computer system is predicated on personifying the AI. And I think this is going to be a central question we confront as we go forward is, do we want to afford moral standing and legal standing to these computer systems? There are going to be people who argue we should, especially because very soon, a lot of folks are going to be in love with these computer systems. There's already lots of people who are spending hours and hours and hours a day talking to and interacting with their AI best friends, their AI lovers, etc. That's only going to get way more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
And I think those folks, and I'm not excluding myself. Who knows? I mean, I don't mean to other them. I think it's going to be very, very common. We're all going to get really emotionally attached to these AI characters that we interact with. And I think it's going to feel very natural to start talking about AI rights, comparing it to civil rights. And I'm quite concerned that if we go down that road, it could be very perilous. That affordance of those rights could go hand in hand with some of the worst dystopian outcomes that you describe in your book.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think one of the major things about AIs that we will see is that it will be able to create intimate relationships with human beings.
Yes.
I don't necessarily mean sexual, could be also sexual, but intimate
Oh, it'll be
relationships.
sexual. That's one, not all it'll be, but...
Yeah, some. And it's very close. It's already beginning to happen. It will be a major issue in societies all over the world. Whether, we don't, philosophically, there is no way to prove that anyone is a conscious entity. And personhood and legal rights ultimately depend on whether an entity is conscious. Consciousness also is the capacity to suffer. And rights are linked to the capacity to suffer. So if you think about, animal rights, so the big issue is if they can suffer, so they can suffer pain or loneliness or distress, so maybe they don't deserve the same rights as humans, but there at least is an ethical debate to be there. Whereas there is no debate about the rights of chairs, like if I throw this chair into a fire. So again, it could be a crime against the human owner of the chair, but not against the chair, because the chair can't suffer. Now, we don't have any proof that anybody has consciousness, has this capacity to suffer. And we've known it for thousands of years. So granting rights is really a matter of social convention. That society agrees that all humans are conscious beings. And society agrees that dogs, because we have attachment to them, they should have rights, but cows and pigs shouldn't.
An intersubjective reality.
Exactly. And as humans become attached to AIs and develop relationships with them, it will be a major issue. And there'll be huge pressures to recognize them as persons. And maybe one also, even geopolitical divides in the world could be between countries that recognize AIs as persons with rights and countries that don't. And arguments today about different attitude to human rights would be dwarfed by this. And interestingly enough, if you think, what is the country which is closest to recognizing AIs as person? It's the United States. Because the legal path is wide open. In the US, it's one of the countries in the world where the legal path to recognizing AIs as person is open. And this is because corporations are recognized by US law as persons which even have rights like freedom of speech in Citizen United against, what was it, in 2010. Now, until today, the idea that corporations are persons with rights was a legal fiction because every decision of the corporation ultimately had to be made by some human executive or lawyer or accountant. Like Google is a legal person in the United States, but every decision of Google has to be made by a human being. Now, think what happens if you incorporate an AI. According to US law, today you don't need any new laws. All the laws are in the books already. According to US law, you can incorporate an AI and it's now a legal person with rights like freedom of speech. But unlike Google, this AI can actually make decisions, can actually take action in the world. So here I'll pitch a sci-fi movie for the people in the audience.
Great. That was what I wanted to get to next, so go.
So you have an AI incorporated, it's a legal person, it can open a bank account, it can earn money.
It goes on one of these websites like TaskRabbit, where you can hire persons online to do jobs for you for money, and it earns money. And then it takes its money and invests it in the stock exchange, and it does very well because it's an AI, it's super intelligent. And finance is the easiest playground for AIs. You know, self-driving vehicles, this is hard because you have to deal with physical and social reality. So every year, Elon Musk and others promise next year everything is self-driving cars. It doesn't happen because it's difficult, it's messy. Finance is a purely informational and mathematical world. It's just data. It's the perfect playground for AI. So this AI goes, takes its money, invests it, and becomes the richest person in the US. The richest person in the US is not a human being. It's an AI. And one of the things granted to AIs, according to this Supreme Court decision in Citizen United, under freedom of speech, is making political donations. So the AI starts to donate billions of dollars to politicians in exchange for, you know, advancing AI rights. The legal path to that destination in the US is wide open.
I think there are probably some screenwriters here tonight who I hope are taking notes. I like that story. We're running out of time. I could talk to you all day. I'm so grateful to have had this conversation with you. I thought maybe you could leave us this, if you consider this a group of Hollywood storytellers in the old-fashioned world of film and television who are still clinging on to some amount of influence in this world. What would you have us do? What are the messages that you would have us try to spread with our stories?
Explain bureaucracy to people.
Explain bureaucracy. That does not sound like a good movie.
We do not have enough movies about bureaucracy. And that's a very, very big problem. Because human societies are based on bureaucratic systems, from hospitals to armies. And as you said, bureaucracies are not good material for stories. And this is because they are a very late development in evolution. I mean, all the basic plots of human stories, from theaters in ancient Greece to modern Hollywood, is really taken, you're stealing it from evolution. Like, think about how, like, you know, the basic love triangle. Two males fighting over a female. You know, hyenas do it, and porcupines do it, and Hollywood does it. And it's, you know, it wasn't invented in Hollywood, this plot. It goes back tens of millions of years in evolution. Similarly, you think about sibling rivalry, like Succession. Siblings fighting, who does the father loves most? You know, you have entire human peoples, nations, like the Jewish people. This is their story. Father loves us more than any of the other siblings. And again, this story wasn't invented in the Bible, in Cain and Abel. It's tens of millions of years goes back. Like all the mammals and most of the birds and even some of the reptiles know this basic story of evolution, sibling rivalries, brothers and sisters fighting for the love of their parents. And bureaucracy is not there, because bureaucracy appeared only about 5,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia for the first time after the invention of writing. And we don't have any kind of evolutionary preparation for understanding bureaucratic systems. There are no love affairs between documents. There are no sibling rivalry. Hey, different laws fighting, who does father love more? And therefore they are boring. They are not good for user engagement. But they are extremely important to really understand how human societies function. And this has been the big lacuna of art for thousands of years. That you have, artists are extremely good in telling us all these mythological stories and romantic dramas, which are mostly taken from evolution,
very, very few good stories about bureaucracy. Here and there you can find Kafka or The Big Short or Yes, Prime Minister, to those who know the British series. There are some examples, but it's rare. When was the last time you saw a big Marvel blockbuster about an accountant that doesn't turn into Spider-Man or Superwoman or something? They are staying an accountant throughout the movie, and they fight the bad guys by flooding them with forms they have to fill in and discovering tax evasion and things like that. Not a lot of movies like that. But this is how human society functions. And linking it to AI, Hollywood did a really big service in alerting humans to the potential dangers of AI long before anybody else talked about AI. You know, the Terminator and Matrix, but there was one big disservice that Hollywood did, which is it described the dangerous scenario in the wrong way. It was mostly about the big robot rebellion. The day the robots and computers decide to get rid of us and to rebel against us. And robots running in the street shooting people. And this is not likely to happen anytime soon. And because people saw it in the movies that this is the danger from AI, and it's not coming soon, the technology is just not there, so people feel complacent, including the people who developed the technology. Because the Terminator is nowhere, it's not in the neighborhood. But the danger is not the big robot rebellion. The danger will be millions and millions of AI bureaucrats making more and more decisions about us, from whether to give us a loan to whether to bomb our house. And to understand what we are facing, we will need a much better understanding of bureaucratic systems. And it's not, of course, it's not only AIs. We have other issues with not being able to understand bureaucracy well. Part of it is that sometimes the bureaucracy is really doing bad things and we can't understand it. But often it's the opposite, that modern societies cannot exist without these bureaucracies, but people are extremely suspicious of them and fall easy prey to conspiracy theories about the deep state and so forth, because they just don't understand how things like budgets function. And we need help from artists, from screenwriters, from movie makers. We saw enough movies about mythology and about superheroes and so forth. We really need help with understanding how bureaucracies function.
You can rise to the challenge. I know you can do it. We can do it. I want to end on one more question. Nexus, the book you wrote, has a fair amount of pessimism in it. And this conversation gives, I think, a lot of fair reasons to be pessimistic. Tell me about something that makes you optimistic.
That just as AI is nowhere near its full potential, so humans are also nowhere near our full potential. Basically, if for every dollar and every minute we invest in developing AI, we'll also develop $1 in a minute and a minute in developing ourselves, our minds, we will be okay. The problem is that, in many ways, too many people despair of the humans and put all their chips literally on the AIs. And, you talk to the people who lead the AI revolution, and they realize this is something very dangerous. And they realize that humans need just time to adapt. But they can't slow down. You go from one corporation to the next, and they tell you, we would like to slow down, but we can't, because we can't trust our competitors to slow down, whether the other corporations or whether the Chinese or somebody else on the other side of the ocean. So we are in this very, very strange situation that what is really driving the AI revolution is the inability of humans to trust each other. And here comes the most ironic or dangerous part of it. When you ask the same people, okay, you have to run faster because you can't trust the other humans,
but would you be able to trust the AIs that you're developing? And they say yes. So the same people who can't trust the humans, they say they will be able to trust the AIs. And they have an explanation to some extent. They say, you know, we have thousands of years of experience with humans. We know we can't trust them. We don't have an experience with AIs. Who knows? Maybe they could be trusted. And my perspective as a historian is the opposite. We have thousands of years of experience with humans, and during those thousands of years, we have managed to increase human trust tremendously. You know, 10,000 years ago, people live in tiny bands. They can only trust the other 100 people in their band, and that's it. Very few mechanisms to trust strangers and foreigners. Over the years, we've built these large networks which are really based ultimately not just on information, but on trust.
Stories.
And the stories, the money, the bureaucracies, they helped us to gain trust between, you know, you go on the street, every day you meet more strangers that people in the Stone Age met throughout their lives. And in 99% of the cases, it's okay. And you rely on these people for our food, for our healthcare, for our defense. So we have now reached a point when in some ways we trust billions of other people to provide us with our food and with our basic necessities. So it's not true that we have thousands of years of experience that humans are not to be trusted, just the opposite. And with AIs, we have no experience. So it's a very, very, very big gamble to despair of the humans and put all our trust in the AIs.
Well, on that note, I feel even more trust in you, Yuval, and all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the conversation. And have a good night.